So my talk is about teaching the Buddhism of the future, not the past. And in order to do this, we need to start by thinking about, well, what is the future going to look like? We know that people have talked about the future many times in the past, and usually they get it horribly wrong. So, we live in a very technological society, obviously, and we are a particularly privileged segment of that. So we've really got a lot of benefits. I was very frustrated this morning when I couldn't get proper Wi-Fi in my hotel room, But there's been a lot of unforeseen negative consequences to technology, and that's where I really want to start my talk. So we humans, one of our abilities is as designers, and we have designed our life to a degree that there is no more nature. We determine what is nature and what isn't, and so we exercise a lot of foresight and strategic planning in what we do, but we're obviously not infallible in how we do that. And you don't have to look too far these days to see some of these negative consequences. Our planet is in a very, very bad situation, and we're on this ecological tipping point, and things are going to get a whole lot worse before they get better, if they get better. And another factor here is that our current societal structures don't seem to be able to provide any kind of a check to this momentum, this self-destructive behavior that our civilization has. And so we're heading for a system collapse. I think a lot of people would argue that. And we can't just throw more technology at the problem to solve it. And as a result, a lot of us have this great anxiety and anticipatory grief and despair and feelings of powerlessness, like, what are we going to do? So we see that the longer-term goal here is to reach a new kind of a society, a permaculture that's not based on eternal progress and growth, but something that's based on cooperation and collaboration with sustainable, equitable foundations, which I think sounds pretty Buddhist. But getting there is going to be a very difficult transition, and it's an all-hands-on-deck situation. Nobody can afford to sit back and just watch it happen. So this is not a Buddhist challenge. This is a challenge to every religious institution, every secular institution, every faith, every organization. And so basically the question is, how do we regenerate our biosphere when so many seem intent on squeezing the last bit of life out of it? Just as an aside here, my wife always says, if I ever need a cloud around my silver lining, I just come to you, and you will provide this for us. But basically, this is what young people like Sierra Robinson and Autumn Peltier and Greta Thunberg are saying. That's what they're asking us to do. And so, in fact, there are many intentional communities and indigenous societies who are already modeling what that permaculture might look like. And there have been some encouraging signs that Buddhist teachers and organizations are beginning to embrace that green practice path. So I look at David Loy, who refers to us as eco-sattvas. I look at Stephanie Kaza, who talks about our work as being the green practice path. Sadly, we are still the outliers. And it's for that reason that I think it's particularly important that we as teachers of Buddhism in the academic context direct our students' attention to these initiatives much more strongly than we do now, because we're already in the role of being leaders. We are in loco parentis to these students. And it also means that Buddhists have to get beyond the noble generalities that we've heard and get much more involved in initiatives that are happening outside the world of traditional Buddhism towards these goals. When I discovered Buddhism 50 years ago, there were very few books and even fewer Dharma centers here in Canada, and now there's a staggeringly large number of books on Buddhism, mindfulness, and so on, several thousand Dharma and Dharma-adjacent centers in North America, not to mention many university programs in Buddhist studies. When I was at McGill University in the 60s and I wanted to study Buddhist studies, they said, okay, we don't really have a program in that, but we'll figure something out. And then when it came time to register, they said, oh, you have to take these courses in New Testament analysis and ecclesiastical history. So I dropped out and became a Buddhist monk instead. But now we have a very different picture. So I'm going to propose something pretty radical in this group, and that is that we don't need any more resources about the Buddhism of the past and how we got here. We've done a terrific job of making those resources available, and so I'm eternally grateful to my teachers and authors and professors who've done all this great work. Thank you very much. But what we do need is for Buddhists to visualize the future, talk about the future, and help each other make it happen. What we also need is for Buddhists to take a more active role in interfaith and secular networks working for the common good of healing the planet. So for us as teachers, the talk part is particularly important because we are at the nexus of connecting students with something authentic and visceral, not just scholastic. And at the same time, we are constantly discovering our own next steps, as many of us in this room have said, like, oh, I'm learning this from this and doing this now and so on and so forth. But the techniques that we use to be active are primarily language-based. So speaking for myself, I feel like I'm at a new leg of my personal journey and practice, and I look back at all the things that I've learned and done, and I think, wow, was I ever stupid or ignorant, or like there was so much more I could be doing, and my eyes are more open now. So I'm speaking here as a newbie with beginner's mind. I'm not a Roshi or a Dharma teacher, or not an academic like you guys. I have my own imposter syndrome thing happening here. But as a technological design teacher, my classes were very different from the kinds of classes that you operate here. So the high school mantra that we used was student-directed, project-based, activity-driven, and group work. So I would, for example, a project I did, there's an airport here in Toronto called Buttonville Airport that's closing. It's a huge airport. They want to redevelop the land. So I asked my grade 12 architectural design students to create a public website which would be a repository for all of the different views and planning documents around what they were going to do with this airport. So there would be a place where activists could go to access all of this information and to interact with each other. So it was a real world hands-on experience. It wasn't about them learning something. It was about them doing something of value in the world. Again, I use these high school metaphors, but instead of being the sage on the stage, I'm the guide on the side and saying, okay, here it is, you can do this. So I see a larger struggle with competing pedagogical models, embracing new technology while collectively wincing. Our students can Google Classroom, whip together a slide deck, tweak their playlists, keep their social media up to the minute, and work on online, rich content, interactive lessons all at the same time. And I will admit, I almost succumbed to the same fever myself. I had a killer PowerPoint app that I was going to show you, full of all this great stuff, and I ran it past a couple of my professor buddies in Ottawa, and basically they said, you're going to kill them, forget it, just simplify it, get down to the heart of what you really want to say as if you're in a conversation with your friends around dinner. What's really your heartfelt message here? So I threw all that away. So somehow students are going to miraculously show up at your classroom door, and they're going to have, some of them, a genuine thirst for knowledge and guidance. And so to use a Buddhist metaphor, will you teach them about the type of wood that was used to create the shaft of the arrow that's killing our planet? Or about the feathers of the now extinct bird that were used for the fledges? No. You'll teach them about how to safely remove arrows from people and animals without causing them to bleed to death or get sepsis. And then you'll send them out into the world to do whatever is needed to heal the planet. So it's kind of like what a lot of our indigenous leaders are trying to do. You'll teach them to plant trees, create wetlands, abandon our cancerous economic model, and prepare for a carbon-negative world that can sustain a likely global population of about 2.6 billion extremely traumatized people. Some will identify as Buddhists, some will not, but the work remains the same. So our role as teachers is kind of like what chaplains are now doing in helping traumatized people. But sadly, society at large does not appreciate the work of chaplains much outside of the limited contexts that they operate in, and does not value it enough to make it a viable career. And neither do the ordained Sangha have much respect for chaplains too, I've been told by people in the field. So for that matter, pressures on academic institutions have made teaching a rather precarious career too. We all have stories about the pushback against public education, the adjunctification of higher education, and so on and so forth. And on top of that, we're not therapists or social workers, and we don't have enough services to help us when we do recognize a student needs extra psychological or learning support. That's been defunded. So when I was teaching up in North Toronto, my student population was 80% Asian, 10% Persian, and 10% everything else. And the Asians were mostly Chinese, originally Cantonese speakers, then Mandarin speakers. Then we started getting a lot more Koreans into the system, and I wanted to find out why my Korean students were sleeping all the time in class. And I found out that it was because they were staying up all night because of the time zone thing to play video games with their friends back in Korea. So when they got to class, they were a mess. I had to convert a lot of my curriculum into Mandarin, Korean, Farsi. I learned how to speak enough Mandarin or Cantonese or Farsi to say, hey, you guys, quit fooling around, get back to work, and where's your homework, and stuff like that. Anyway, so this backdrop, this collective lack of imagination is the reality for Buddhist teachers today, well, I'll just leave that at that. So Bhikkhu Bodhi and other engaged Buddhist teachers say we need to pivot from an individual quest for liberation to recognize our interdependent global systems and to take our practice to a collective level, embracing the environment, social ills, politics, and global policy. It's always going to be a balancing act, private and public practice, insight, and engagement. That's my number one takeaway message. Embracing the green practice path has to be a priority for all of us. So just to sum up from that, what I'm trying to do with this is, for my part, I'm currently working on a research project and working on a book to give 20 or 30 examples of environmentally forward-thinking projects from Dharma centers in North America. I've got a database of about 100 rural centers. And basically what I want to know is, well, what are you doing in terms of green practice at your center, in terms of protecting trees, wildlife, water table, all kinds of things. So here's my homework for you. Do you need to find resources on green Buddhism? Email me. I'll share what I've got with you. When you teach about social justice, gender issues, political systems, economics, birth and death, and other facets of human experience seen from the Buddhist perspective, do you incorporate the environmental dimension of those systems? My first guess is no, because the word environment never came up yesterday once. Nobody uttered that word. Make a list for yourself of all the messages and ways you can embrace not just Buddha nature and human nature in your courses, but wild nature too. The Dharma is about all beings, not just humans. That's our interbeing. And above all, however you see yourself contributing to a healthy future, take heart and be the future. Thank you.